The last Supercars race before the current mid-season break was held under lights at Sydney Motorsport Park. And like many fans, I am eager to see more of this night racing into the future, but I don't necessarily think the setup we saw in Sydney should be the blueprint. So today, I'm going to discuss how I want to see Supercars tackle night racing in the future, and at the end we'll delve into some of the tracks you've suggested would be great under lights. Let's quickly recap the modern history of night racing in Supercars, at least because it returned in 2018 with a night round around Sydney Motorsport Park using temporary lighting. Now, it was a little bit patchy, but it looked fantastic, and we had a great race that weekend, which made it all the more special. We also saw night racing rolled out to my local round of the championship here in Western Australia, but sadly that only lasted a couple of years under lights. In more recent years, Sydney Motorsport Park has of course transformed into a place like Abu Dhabi in terms of their lighting setup with big stadium lights that are very high tech, and Supercars of course are going to take advantage of those facilities. However, I actually prefer the temporary setup, and I think that should be Supercars' path looking into the future. So let's discuss why I think worse lighting is actually better. So there's a bunch of reasons why I feel this way. Firstly, permanent lighting is frankly just too good these days. It removes the spectacle and wow factor of night racing, in my opinion, especially when it practically becomes so bright that it's daytime again. It feels like you're kind of defeating the whole purpose of night racing. And with F1 and MotoGP and other series all around the world now running under similar lighting setups at multiple rounds of their championships, it just doesn't have the same wow factor that it used to 10 to 15 years ago. Temporary lighting, on the other hand, just looks gnarly. The cars look so much faster. They really pop as they go through the light and dark spots, and everything just feels so much more dramatic. And I was really reminded of this when I checked out the highlights of the 2018 event recently on YouTube and compared that to the highlights of 2024. I highly recommend checking that out. You will feel and see the difference in the drama. It's quite literally a night and day difference. The second reason why I prefer the darker setup is the fact it introduces more of a challenge for the drivers. It's harder to see the track edges, it's harder to see your opponents around you and where they may be positioned in relation to your car, and that will hopefully lead to more mistakes and incidents to just spice up the reasonably tame racing that we've seen in more recent years. Of course, you never want to darken the track to a point where it's dangerous. Of course, there's a compromise there. However, I do want to see the best drivers in Australia be tested and occasionally get it wrong as well. And the final reason why I prefer the temporary setup is actually a point that was made by Andrew Van Leeuwen on the Full Credit to the Noise podcast. He made the point that if teams and drivers are willing to accept a lower standard of lighting, not only does it make it more entertaining for us as fans, but in theory, it should be cheaper for the sport as well, because they'll have to hire less equipment to pull the events off. Now, once again, there is a minimum standard you'd have to meet to ensure it's of broadcast quality, but again, I think there's a sweet spot there that should hopefully make it better for the fans and also achievable for the sport. That brings us on to the cons, the first of which is of course the extra expense. No matter how much teams and drivers are willing to sacrifice on the lighting quality, there's no doubt night racing comes with some extra expense. For a start, you have to hire all that powerful lighting equipment, and then of course you've got to think you have to send the TV crews out there a little bit earlier as well to understand what the lighting levels are like and plan the broadcast accordingly. So there's no doubt, no matter what form of night racing we're doing, it's always a bit of a financial risk for Supercars, but hopefully the spectacle it creates offsets those costs with TV viewers and of course ticket sales at the track. TV is indeed the second big challenge for Supercars if they are doing more night racing. Supercars has a fairly good cadence in terms of the timing of its events, more often than not in the middle of the day for most Australians. But if they do more night racing, all of a sudden they're going to be competing, at least on free-to-air, during prime time. That gets a little bit challenged for the sport to try and find their place among the competitive TV time slot. And then of course there's the time zones. This was a talking point for the Perth event with the fact the race over in Western Australia in the evening meant it was on quite late for the audiences over east. So not insurmountable challenges, but definitely some considerations for the sport to think through. And then finally, you have to ensure a positive experience for the fans who head trackside. We know that most parts of Australia get bloody cold at night at this time of the year, so Supercars need to find a way to host these night races during the warmer months or pick their tracks wisely and circuits that have a good climate for night racing, which leads us onto where supercars should be racing under lights in the future. The first suggestion from Stormy here is our next event, Tasmania. He says Symmons Plains would make for a fantastic night race and be relatively easy to light because it is, of course, a reasonably short circuit. I think Tasmania is a great suggestion. That event feels like it needs a bit of oomph. It feels like it's being a little bit mundane over recent years, and a night round could really take it up to the next level. I would love to see the supercars bashing around there in the dark. However, the big factor for Tasmania, of course, would be ensuring it's held in the warmer months. It's barely going to be tolerable next weekend in the daytime. So yes, it's definitely something they'd have to fix. The second suggestion from Gates says the Gold Coast would be my pick. A street circuit would look insane under lights. And yeah, I'd love to see this one happen. In fact, it nearly did. I believe it was the 2019 season. Supercars announced their plans for Gold Coast to be held at nighttime. However, sadly, the pandemic derailed those plans. I'd love to see them blow the dust off that because I think Gold Coast would look absolutely awesome and help bring a bit of magic back to that event. Speaking of bringing magic back to events, Andrew Van Leeuwen, again on the Full Credit to the Noise podcast, suggested Townsville. I think that could be a good pick as well. And again, have that street circuit element. And the one I want to throw in the mix is Darwin. In terms of the climate, you could pretty much hold that night race more or less any time of the year, and is a reasonably short circuit that you would think should be quite achievable to light. So yeah, I'd love to see night racing around Darwin, and they are rumored in fact to be the next track to receive a permanent lighting setup, but that's subject to some state government funding, I understand. To close this one out, it is of course important to acknowledge that permanent lighting setups like we see at SMP do bring year-round benefits for grassroots motorsport communities, but the simple fact is very few tracks around Australia have that level of facility. So if supercars are going to do more night racing in the future, the temporary lighting setup that I'm pitching here today, I think is the most likely scenario. So let me know what you guys think. Would you like to see supercars have more night races in these big stadium lit tracks, or do you prefer that older setup like I do, like we saw around Wanneroo and SMP in 2018? Would love to hear your thoughts down below. Remember to treat people like your trackside while you're down there, and of course be sure to like and subscribe if you want to see me cover the upcoming round of the championship, of course taking place around Symmons Plains in just a few days' time.